Shalom, shalom. This video is about Parashat Shalach. It means to send because it refers to Moses sending out 12 spies to spy out the promised land. It is from the fascinating book of Numbers, chapters 13, 14 and 15. And it goes hand in hand with a prophet's portion from the book of Joshua, chapter 2, the entire chapter, and goes with a gospel portion from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10. Prescribed is verses 1 to 14, but I want to encourage you to read up to the end of Matthew, chapter 10 for context. It's the 37th Torah portion out of 54 Torah portions for the year. And it is so rich, it's so rich. My name is Barney de Klerk. I'm not a teacher of the Bible. I'm a student, and I love sharing what I'm reading from this week's scripture portions with you. And I hope that it will encourage you to read and study the scriptures with an open mind for yourself. As I said, the Torah portion is about Moses sending out 12 spies, and it ties to the gospel portion where Yeshua sends out 12 disciples on their first mission, and to the prophet portion where Joshua sent out spies to spy out the land before they took Jericho. A very, very brief overview, because it's so rich, we cannot talk about everything. I've just picked a couple of verses which I'm going to talk about, but the depth of the book of Numbers and of this portion specifically is amazing. So the very brief overview is that Moses sent out the 12 spies. The land was rich and wonderful, but there was giants in the land. Giants from the fallen angels who came to the daughters of man before the flood. They caused the Nephilim, the initial giants before the flood. Noah's wife or one of his daughters-in-law must have carried the gene. So after the flood, certainly from the descendants of Cush, giants arose again. The latent genes in Cush became activated, and once again there were giants, and the giants were eating humans as well. And so because of the giants, the 10 spies colluded with one another to give a bad report, and only Joshua and Caleb, who were spies under Moses, stuck with a good positive report. The people then rebelled against Moses. Well, first of all, Adonai said, okay, if you commit Lashon Hara against the land, then, turn around, go back to the desert for another 38 years to make a complete count of 40. And the people then rebelled against Moses and against Adonai. And Adonai said in his response, he was angry. He appeared above the tabernacle in his glory, and the whole nation of Israel saw him in his glory. And he said to Moses, I want to whack these people. And Moses said, he actually said he wanted to kill them as one man, meaning with one blow. But Moses interceded for Israel, and he saved them for a while. It's actually fascinating. That's what we're going to talk about. It was actually Moses' proposal to Adonai, not to kill them in one go, but to let them wither and die over the next 38 years, even though he may not have realized it's 38 years at that time. Then thereafter, Adonai made it very clear to Moses and to Israel that Torah law applies equally to Israel and to the Gentiles. So churches who says that the Torah has been done away with, they don't know the Bible, don't listen to them. they go directly against Adonai Eloheinu's instruction to say Torah applies equally to Israel as well as to the Gentiles. And then Adonai differentiates between ignorant sin and willful sin. Even though ignorance of the law is no excuse, that's a legal principle from Torah times into modern law as well. But there is a difference regarding whether you sin because you're ignorant or whether you sin in spite of knowing what is the right thing to do. And then the Torah portion concludes with the Torah commandments regarding tzitzit on the tassels on the corner of the garments, and their purpose is to serve as a reminder of the Torah commandments. Something the Jews stick to, something the church scoffs at. Okay, all 12 spies agreed that the land indeed was good and it had agricultural riches, abundant milk and honey, they said. But the 10 spies submitted a bad report that Israel will not be able to take possession because of the giants in the land and because of the fortifications around the cities. Now the cities was fortified against the giants, not against Israel, because the giants were eating people, and that's why the cities were fortified. In their report, they named 3 giants, Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, and they descended from Anak of the Nephilim. Upon Joshua and Caleb's insistence that God will give the inhabitants into their hands, these 10 bad spies changed their track and told all Israel that the land devours its inhabitants. What they meant is not the land itself devouring the inhabitants, but the giants in that land are devouring the inhabitants. Historically, as I said a couple of times now, the giants devoured people in their constant craving for meat. We know this also from Greek mythology, which is based on the giants before the flood and also in the early years after the flood. The prospect that this could be their fate, being eaten by a giant. And, I'm just thinking fables like Jack and the Beanstalk also draws on the same topic, and it's rooted in our ancient history before the flood and in these years after the flood as well. And that caused the people, the 10 bad spies, to excite the people or ignite the people to say they want to return to Egypt. And they even threatened to stone Moses and Aaron. The day on which this happened, on which the spies made this bad report, is a very important and very sad day in Jewish history. It was on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av. And that day in Jewish history marks the date on which both the temples, the first temple and the second temple, were destroyed, and many of the prosecuting events in history against the Jewish people started on this date, on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of the month of Av. To stop this madness of going back to Egypt, Adonai's glory became visible to the whole nation from the tabernacle, and his anger burnt against them. He intended to smite them with a plague. But Moses, full of the Spirit, pleaded for mercy and grace on them with a prayer structure that we can learn from and implement in our prayer life as well. He prayed the scriptures back to Adonai, reminding Adonai of his promises, as well as reminding Adonai of his character, his 13 attributes. And which includes that he's slow to anger, abundant in loving kindness and forgiving. And Moses didn't make excuses. He acknowledged in his intercession that Adonai cannot leave sin unpunished, but he still pleaded for mercy and for grace. Adonai answered the prayers by showing grace and mercy, reducing the punishment to a life sentence, from a death sentence to a life sentence. The life sentence is 40 years or 38 years in the desert, except of course for the 10 spies. They died on the spot. And so doing, God also answered the prayer. And there's an interesting thing for you to explore, a prayer of Israel under the incitement of the 10 bad spies. In the book of Numbers, chapter 14, verse 28, and then also verse 32, 35, and that is Adonai answering their prayer from Numbers 14, verse 2. So in chapter 14, look at verse 2, and then see how their prayer is answered in verse 28, 32, and 35. It is important to take care what you pray for. Adonai is neither small-minded or spiteful, but he will protect his honor. So it will be worthy to look at Moses' prayer, praying the scriptures to Adonai, not making excuses, admitting guilt, calling on Adonai's character for mercy and for grace. And that's what Moses did. His prayer got answered. Regarding Moses, I want to say true godly leadership is scarce, and it comes at a high cost as well. And after Moses, consider Yeshua as the principal example, the prime example. Very few people dare to answer such a call. I want to say in the whole world today, in our postmodern world, Israel's Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu is probably the only such leader in the world at the moment. Moses sent the 12 spies out with the questions that you can expect in modern surveillance as well. Are the people in the land strong or weak? Are they few or many? Is the land good or bad? Are the cities walled or unfortified? Is the soil fertile or barren? Are there any trees in the land? And if you can, bring back some fruit. And that was specifically his request, because it was at the time of Sukkot, the harvest festival of the summer fruit. So let's look at 2 verses in depth to understand some of the complexities and the depth in this Torah portion. The first one is Numbers 14 verse 22. I must say these 2 verses also relate to one another. Numbers 14 verse 22, the Adonai says to Israel, you've rebelled against me 10 times now, and that's why I want to whack you. So the question is, does the verse refer to historic 10 times, or does it refer to just one bad report from each one of the 10 bad spies who were princes of their tribe, who committed Lashon Hara against the promised land? And I hope to show you that it's all of the above. The text refers to all these men to have seen Adonai's Et Kadodi in Hebrew. in which the et is not translated. Let me take a step back. The Hebrew word et, the Aleph Tav, occurs in the Tanakh in the Old Testament over 9,800 times, and for more than 3,500 times et is not translated, because translators say in those cases that et is untranslatable. I beg to differ. Et has a primary and a secondary meaning. The primary meaning is the God of creation. That's his name, Et, Aleph Tav. And the secondary meaning means the one and only unique thing of which there is no other thing. And you can see there's even a relationship between these two meanings. So in this text, in Numbers 14 verse 22, the text said, these men have seen Adonai's et kadudi. Kadudi is kabod. Kabod means his glory, God's honor. And the D suffix at the end means mine. Adonai speaking, he says, Kadodi, they've seen my glory. That's what he's saying. But we first have to understand who's et, because he says et Kadodi. Aleph Tav Kadodi. And that takes us back to verse 10, Numbers 14 verse 10, in which Adonai's glory appeared above the tabernacle to all Bnei Israel. The et Aleph Tav refers to the pre-incarnate Yeshua, and I will go ahead and tell you why I say so. In Numbers 14 verse 22 records that none of the people who saw Adonai et and the miracles that he did in Egypt and the miracles done in the desert up to that time, they still tested him 10 times, and therefore they will never see the promised land. In spite of all the miracles they witnessed, they still tested him. I didn't plan on saying this, but just off the cuff, there's a Kabbalistic view of God, of Adonai, with a big head and a little head. The big head have a long nose, which means he's patient, loving kindness, endures forever. And the little head has a short nose, which means that he's impatient. He says, I want justice now. And then in the Kabbalah's view of Adonai, there's the oil that flows between the heads, which is obviously the Holy Spirit. The big head is known as the Ancient of Days. It clearly refers to God the Father. And the little head, the impatient one who wants justice, is Yeshua the Messiah. He's the Son of God. He's not a pink little baby in which you can shove a pacifier in his mouth if you want him to shut up and not talk to your conscience. No, he's the King of Kings. He's impatient. He wants to come. It is the Ancient of Days who's holding him back to the fullness of time, who will tell him, now you can go and fetch your bride. That's by the way. But I hope you understand this picture of Adonai, Eloheinu, our God, is complex. We don't understand him. We cannot grasp him. We definitely cannot define and limit him. Back to Israel. In general terms, the 10 times includes the entire nation, but in the narrow interpretation, the 10 times refers to the 10 spies, the bad spies, the 10 spies who made the bad report. Because of the context referring to Caleb just thereafter in Numbers 14 verse 24. Each bad report from each one of these 10 princes condemned the prince's entire tribe to death in the desert. The lesson for us is to choose your leader representatives wisely, because you and your tribe will either live or die by the leaders you selected. The responsibility to select good leaders is yours. The gematria of the number 10, of course, means complete, in the measure that their testing of Adonai Et has reached its fullness now. 10 is enough, basta, at that moment. Enough is enough. Once the measure is full, Adonai will act. The textual precedence about this measure of 10 comes from Genesis 31 verse 7, when Jacob complained to his wife about their father Laban. It's just as they were moving away from Laban back to the promised land. He said to his two wives, he says, your father have changed my remuneration 10 times already. And what he's saying is, enough is enough. Now I'm going. And also in the book of Job, chapter 19, verse 3, when Job's patience with his friend Bildad ran out after 10 insults. I didn't open my book with that, but I marked it out, and I can quickly read that again, spontaneous, unplanned. The first of 10 insults, Bildad said to Job, indeed the light of the wicked is snuffed out, the flame of his fire does not shine. He said that to Job, implying that Job is the wicked one. Then the second insult is, he said, is the wicked one's vigorous stride is shortened, and his own scheme throws him down. That's what he says. Job, what's happening to you? The third insult is, for he is cast into a net by his feet. He wanders into its mesh. A trap seizes him by the heel. A snare holds him fast. Again implying that Job is the wicked one. The fourth insult is, on every side terror frighten him and harass his every step. Again, and then the fifth insult is, calamity is hungry for you, Job. For him, disaster is ready for his fall. It goes on to say, it eats away pieces of his skin. Death's firstborn devours his limbs. Death's firstborn devours his limbs. What a thing to say to your so-called friend who's going through the trauma that Job went through. The sixth of 10 insults is, he's torn from the security of tents and march off to the king of terrors. March to the king of terrors. The seventh insult is, below his roots dry up and above his branches wither. The eighth insult is, Job's memory will perish from the earth, which did not happen because Job's not the wicked one. The ninth insult is, he is driven from light into darkness, and that temporary is what happened to Job. And the 10th and last insult is, he has no offspring or descendants amongst his people. Remember, Job had 10 children who died in the tragedy. What a thing to say to your friend when his children died. And that's why in Job 19 verse 3, Job says to Bildad, 10 times now you've reproached me. You attack me shamelessly. And the point is that Adonai takes the justification for saying 10 is the limit. This is where I draw the line. He takes it from Jacob in Genesis 31 and he takes it from Job in Job 19. And the 10 times that we find in Israel's history is the first one, Exodus 5 verse 20 to 21. When Pharaoh increased their workload, they turned on to Moses. They said, what have you done to us? And may God punish you for that. And then in Exodus 14 verse 11, at the Red Sea crossing, when they saw Pharaoh's army approaching, they said to Moses, could you not let us live and die in peace in Egypt? In Exodus 15 verse 23, they complained at Marah about the bitter water. And in Exodus 16 verse 2 to 4, they complained about manna. In Exodus 16 verse 12, they complained about the quails. At Exodus 17 verse 1 and 2, it was at Rephidim, they complained that there was no water, and then Moses had to beat the rock to bring forth water. At Exodus 32 verse 1, they tested Adonai with the golden calf. In Numbers 11 verse 31, they complained again about meat, and God gave the quails again. And Numbers 12 verse 1 to 12, they complained about Moses' leadership and also about his wife. And in Numbers 14 verse 1, they complained about the giants in the land. And at that point, the 10 count was full. Adonai drew the line in the sand. He said, I'm not going to take this anymore. And he said, genoeg is genoeg. And he said that, appearing to all Israel in anger above the tabernacle. And then he called Moses to speak to him about it. And it's at that point that Moses interceded for the nation. And then here in Numbers 14, verse 15 and 16, we read about Moses' intercession. It was actually Moses who proposed, do not kill this Exodus generation in the desert, in the Midbar, but rather kill them over an extended period of time. Don't kill them in one shot, but have some grace. Don't give them a death sentence, give them a life sentence in the desert. The word for word translation, if you take the Hebrew text and you translate it word for word, and I'll read English with a few Hebrew words in between. Moses said, if you, Adonai, kill et people, the Aleph Tav people, as one man, ki ish echad, then will speak the nations which heard et your fame, Aleph Tav your fame, et shemaka, which means your holy name, saying, because not able Yod-Heh Vav-Heh to bring et the people into the land. In Hebrew, Hazai et ha'am el ha'eretz, he swore to give them, therefore he killed them in the desert. So you'll see twice Moses refers to the people as the Aleph Tav people, et people, the people belonging to et, to the Aleph Tav. And then you also acknowledge that this translation, the TLV I use, says your fame, Shemaka. But if you look at Shem, it is your name, your reputation, your name, your holy name. Et Shemaka. Again, the Aleph Tav there, Et Shemaka. And then at the end, of course, the other thing that's interesting there, et ha'am, against et the people, and el ha'aretz. And let's look at that in a little more detail. First of all, et the Aleph Tav. Let's understand who it is quickly. I already explained how often it is. The first time that et occurs in the Hebrew text of the Bible is in Genesis 1 verse 1, where it's written in Hebrew but not translated, that Elohim et is the God of creation. It says, in the beginning, Elohim et created the heavens and the earth. And by the translator saying, it is untranslatable, they were hiding the identity of the God of creation from us. And that is consistently so in all the English translations. I also read the Afrikaans translation all the time, also in the Afrikaans translations. But a little light is shed to us about the identity of Et. Now that we know from the Hebrew text, the God of creation is called Elohim Et. And who is Et? We have a little bit of light about who Et is from the prophet Isaiah in chapter 44, verse 6 to 8, and on, and again in Isaiah 44, verse 12, where we learn that Adonai Et is the God who is Israel's king. Do you remember Pontius Pilate testifying that Yeshua is the king of the Jews? Adonai Et is Israel's king. He's also Israel's redeemer, Isaiah says. Who is the redeemer? Of course, it's Yeshua, the Messiah. And Isaiah says he's also Israel's rock. And that refers to the provider of water in the desert. And Isaiah says this, Elohim Et, or Adonai Et, is also known as Adonai Tsevaot. That is Adonai, the Lord, the commander of the heavenly armies. The heavenly army consists of 100 million battle angels. And we read in the Bible that one angel slaughtered 185,000 soldiers in a night. So can you imagine the impact that 100 million battle angels, 100 million angels in the army of Adonai Tsevaot, what they will do? And then Isaiah finally comes to the point that says that Adonai Tsevaot is the first and the last. He's the beginning and the end. He's the Aleph and the Tav. Et, in Hebrew, the Aleph Tav. Aleph is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Tav is the last letter of the alphabet. In Paleo-Hebrew, the Aleph was written as a bull's head, and it represents Adonai's power. And Aleph very often is a silent letter, like Adonai very often is silent, working his purposes. And the Tav, the last letter of the alphabet, is in Paleo-Hebrew, the symbol was a cross, like the crucifixion cross, exactly like that, slightly at an angle. But it means also a mark. A Tav is a mark. It's the mark of the covenant of salvation. When the God of creation finally revealed himself in the book of Revelation, remember that book is called Revelation because Adonai reveals himself to us in that book. So it's not beyond our understanding, it's written for our understanding so that he can be revealed. But in Revelation, his words, which he spoke in Hebrew, are quoted by translators in Greek to mask it a little bit for us. What he said in Revelation 1 verse 5 to 8, and again in Revelation 21 verse 6, and again in Revelation 22 verse 13 and 14. In each one of those cases, it's clear that it's Yeshua talking. He says, I am the Aleph and the Tav. The Greek is, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And that, of course, that draws from Isaiah 55. It draws from the Gospel of John, chapter 7, verse 37-38. It draws from Genesis 2, verse 9. Draws from Genesis 3 verse 22, it draws from Proverbs 3:18 and Proverbs 11:30. It draws from Isaiah 1 verse 18 and it draws from the book of Leviticus chapter 14 verse 8. So it is rich and him the Aleph Tav is, and we know from Revelation that it is Yeshua the Messiah. also remember in last week's Torah portion how the Levites were sprinkled with waters of sin before they were cleansed in order to serve in the temple. It's exactly a picture of Yeshua the Messiah, the leper Messiah, the Messiah ben Yosef, the suffering servant, who took the sin of the world onto him. He was sprinkled with waters of sin and he carried it away, and then so that we can be clean. So let us look at Moses' prayer for Adonai not to kill all Israel as one man again. He twice referred to the people of Israel as Et Am, Aleph Tav Am, God's people, Aleph Tav's people. He reminded Adonai that Israel belongs to him and to no other. Israel is Adonai's chosen people. And I have to say this, do you know who my chosen person is? My chosen person is my wife. Who's your chosen person? I'm sure it's your husband or your wife. Adonai says Israel are his chosen people. Israel is the bride of the Lamb. Israel is the bride of Christ. Israel is the bride of God. Israel is the wife of God. The Bible says it in many, many, many places. Don't lend your ears to people who confuse you with lies to say that the church is the bride of the Lamb. That's not a biblical statement. It's a false teaching. Don't be misled by that. Read your Bible and read it attentively and with discernment. Moses also brought up the issue that it's better, Adonai says there, he says don't smack them, don't kill them as one man. So what Moses is suggesting, it may be better for one man to die for the nation. And that is something that's centuries later coughed up by Caiaphas, the high priest. In the Gospel of John 11 verse 50, you can read it about it. But here Moses was the first to prophesy that Yeshua the Messiah will die for the nation. And then let's go to the next, what's translated as your fame in the TLV. In Hebrew, I've already made the point. Et Shemaka. Shem is your name. Et's name. Aleph Tav's name. Moses effectively prayed that the nations will hear of Adonai Et's good name of salvation, which is Yeshua. Yeshua is the Hebrew word meaning salvation. Moses therefore prayed for Yeshua's instruction to the adulterers to go and sin no more, or to give them a second chance, like the second Passover from last week's Torah portion. Brilliant prayer from Moses. Regarding then what he said, to bring Aleph Tav, the people, into the land. I read the Hebrew sentence, Hazai et ha'am el ha'eretz. Note the tautology, et ha'am. Am means people. Ha'am means the people. Ha in Hebrew means the. It's a prefix. Ha meaning the. But et ha'am, if you take et in its secondary meaning, the one unique thing, then it is the people. Tautology. It is not the secondary meaning here in this case. It's obvious and clear that it is the people who belong to the Aleph Tav, who belong to it. And then the other thing in that sentence again, Hazai et ha'am el ha'aretz, is the El. El, when in Hebrew the prefix El normally indicates direction. If I go to the mountains, I'm go El mountains in Hebrew. But we also know, and that is written only as a letter lamed in front of the word. The direction of I'm going to the tree, I'm going letri in Hebrew. And it's just a letter lamed before tree. But what we have here in the Hebrew text is not only a lamed, but a aleph lamed. Now the aleph lamed, El, is short for Elohim, the God in the beginning. It's the Trinity as one. Then we clearly see that he's saying here El Haaretz, which means not only to the land, but to God's land, because it's Elohim Haaretz. And that's why we call Israel the Holy Land, because the land doesn't belong to the people. The land belongs to Adonai. And just wonderful richness in the text there. In Numbers 14, verse 28 to 35, Adonai answered Israel's prayer from Numbers 14, verse 2 and 3. I already asked you in the beginning to go and read for yourself, but in closing, I just want to make this reminder again. Look at that. In Numbers 14, chapter 14, verses 2 and 3 compared to verses 28 to 35. You'll see that Israel asked for it to die in the wilderness, and in verse 28 to 35, they get what they asked for. They tendered for it, they got it. It's very sad indeed, but we need to learn to take care what we pray for. And at that somber note, I'm going to greet you with a prayer. I pray that Adonai Eloheinu will bless you and keep you, that he will shine his face upon you and be gracious to you. I pray that he will provide for all your needs and that he will give you shalom. Shalom, shalom.